Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's presentation. I'm excited to share with you insights on pastoralists in the modern world. This is the first slide, which is our cover slide. Today, we'll explore the lives of pastoralists, how they adapt to changing environments, and the challenges they face in a rapidly evolving world. So, let's dive in and discover more about this fascinating topic together. Let's take a look at the contents of our presentation. On this slide, we see an overview of the topics we'll be exploring. First, we'll discuss migration, which is a fundamental aspect of pastoral life. Moving on, we'll examine how pastoral nomads and their movements shape their cultures and survival strategies. We'll also look into the Maldhari herders and how they search for pastures across different regions. Next, we'll explore how colonial rule impacted pastoral life, starting with the first phase and moving through various changes. The slide highlights the Reka camel herders, a community renowned for their camel herding skills, and the Maasai of Africa, illustrating the diverse pastoral communities worldwide. We'll see how political changes have influenced pastoralists and how their lives have evolved over time, especially with modernization and economic shifts. The closure of borders and the loss of grazing lands are significant challenges faced today, as pastures dry up and resources become scarcer. We'll also touch on specific events like the camel fair at Pushkar and how economies and colonial policies have affected pastoral communities. Finally, we'll consider how pastoralists coped with these changes, some more successfully than others, and what the future holds for grazing lands and pastoral life globally. This overview sets the stage for a deeper understanding of the resilience and adaptability of pastoral communities throughout history and across continents. Let's talk about migration, specifically focusing on pastoralist communities in India. These communities have a long-standing tradition of moving from one place to another, primarily in search of grazing land and water for their livestock. Migration for them isn't just a temporary movement. It's a way of life deeply embedded in their culture and survival strategies. Their movements are often seasonal, following the availability of resources, which shows a close relationship with the environment. This mobility allows them to sustain their herds and maintain their livelihoods. Understanding their migration patterns is crucial because it highlights how these communities adapt to environmental changes and resource constraints. It also underscores the importance of supporting sustainable practices that respect their traditional ways while ensuring ecological balance. So, in the context of this presentation, recognizing the significance of pastoralist migration helps us appreciate the resilience and adaptability of these communities in a changing world. Now, let's take a closer look at the movements of pastoral nomads in the mountains. First, we have the Gujar Bakarwals, who are primarily found in Jammu and Kashmir. These nomads have a fascinating seasonal pattern. During the winter months, they migrate towards the low hills of the Shivalik region, seeking milder weather and better grazing conditions. Come summer, they move back upwards into the higher elevations, taking advantage of the cooler climate and fresh pastures. Similarly, the Gadi shepherds, who are mostly based in Himachal Pradesh, follow a comparable seasonal migration pattern. In winter, they descend to the lower hills of the Shivalik to escape the harsh cold. Then, in summer, they ascend to Lahul and Spiti, where the cooler temperatures and abundant grazing land provide ideal conditions for their livestock. These movements are not random. They are strategic, driven by the need to find suitable grazing grounds and favorable weather. This seasonal migration showcases the close relationship these communities have with their environment and how they adapt to the mountain terrain. It's a perfect example of traditional nomadic lifestyles perfectly tuned to the mountain landscape, which is a key part of understanding the broader picture of pastoralism in our region. Let's talk about the Gujar community and their summer homes on high mountains. These summer homes are a fascinating aspect of their lifestyle. During the hotter months, the Gujars migrate to these elevated regions to escape the intense heat of the plains. The high mountains provide a cooler climate and a more comfortable environment for them to live and work temporarily. This seasonal movement is not just about temperature relief. It also connects them deeply with their natural surroundings and traditional ways of life. Their summer homes are often simple, functional, and built with local materials, blending seamlessly into the landscape. This practice highlights their close relationship with nature and their adaptability to different environments. It also reflects a broader theme of how traditional communities like the Gujars manage their seasonal cycles and maintain their cultural heritage amidst changing times. So, these high mountain summer homes are more than just a seasonal shelter. They're a vital part of their identity and survival strategy. Now, let's look at the Gaddi's sheep being sheared. This process is a great illustration of how careful management and attention to detail are essential in both agriculture and storytelling. Just as a shearer carefully removes the wool to ensure the sheep's health and comfort, we need to carefully extract and refine our ideas to make sure our messages are clear and effective. It also highlights the importance of preparation, having the right tools and techniques ready to achieve a smooth and successful outcome. In the broader context of our presentation, this scene reminds us that even in the most routine tasks, precision and care are key to achieving the best results. Now, let's talk about the movements of pastoral nomads across the plateaus, plains, and deserts. These communities have traditionally been mobile, moving seasonally to find grazing for their livestock. Starting with the Dangars in Maharashtra, they are one of the prominent pastoral groups in the region, known for their herding skills. Moving westward, in Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh, we find the Galas, Kurumas, and Kurubas. These groups are deeply connected to cattle rearing and are vital to the local economy and culture. In Rajasthan, the Rakas are well known for their resilience and nomadic lifestyle, often moving across vast desert areas to find grazing grounds. Then there are the Banjaras, spread across Uttar Pradesh, Punjab, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, and Maharashtra. They are famous for their trading and transport roles historically, often moving with their carts and livestock. These movements of nomadic groups are not just about survival. They are a crucial part of the ecological and economic fabric of these regions, connecting different areas and supporting rural livelihoods. This mobility highlights how traditional lifestyles adapt to the challenging environments of these diverse landscapes. Let's take a closer look at the Reka camel herd. The Reka community has a long-standing tradition of camel herding, which is not only a livelihood, but also a vital part of their cultural identity. These camels are well adapted to the harsh desert environment, showcasing remarkable resilience and endurance. What makes their herds particularly interesting is the way they manage and care for their camels, emphasizing sustainable practices passed down through generations. This connection between the Reka people and their camels highlights the importance of traditional knowledge in maintaining ecological balance. Overall, the Reka camel herd exemplifies the deep relationship between communities and their environment, reinforcing the theme of sustainable coexistence in challenging landscapes. Let's take a moment to explore the vibrant world of the camel fair at Pushkar. This event is truly a spectacle, drawing thousands of people from around the world. It's not just about camels, it's a celebration of culture, tradition, and community. The fair showcases the rich heritage of Rajasthan, where camels play a vital role in daily life and economy. Visitors can see colorful camel races, beauty contests, and even trading activities, which highlight the importance of camels in this region. Beyond the animals, the fair is also a gathering of musicians, dancers, and artisans, making it a lively and immersive experience. Overall, the camel fair at Pushkar perfectly encapsulates the essence of Rajasthan's cultural vibrancy and its deep-rooted connection to tradition. Now, let's turn our attention to the Rabari, Reka, and Devasi communities. These groups are fascinating because they each have unique cultural identities and traditional livelihoods that have persisted over generations. The Rabari, for example, are primarily pastoralists known for their distinctive clothing and embroidery, which reflects their rich cultural heritage. The Reka are also pastoralists, often involved in cattle rearing, and are crucial to the rural economy. The Devasi, on the other hand, are a bit different. They are traditionally marginalized communities with unique social roles and practices. What's important to understand here is how these communities embody resilience and adaptability, maintaining their traditions while facing modern challenges. Their livelihoods are deeply connected to the land and natural resources, which ties into the broader theme of sustainable living and cultural preservation. Recognizing their contributions helps us appreciate the diversity within rural India and the importance of supporting such communities to sustain their way of life. Let's talk about the Maldhari herders and their movement in search of pastures. These herders are traditionally nomadic, which means they move from place to place depending on the availability of grazing land. Their lifestyle is closely tied to the seasonal patterns of the region. During certain times of the year, they migrate to specific areas where the pastures are lush and suitable for their livestock. This movement is vital for the sustainability of their herds and their livelihood. It also highlights the adaptive strategies they have developed to survive in the challenging environment of this region. Understanding their migratory patterns helps us appreciate the deep connection between these communities and their natural surroundings, and how their traditional practices are shaped by the landscape itself. Let's take a closer look at this table, which outlines the political changes over different periods. During the pre-colonial era, communities had high importance as breeders, meaning they played a crucial role in maintaining cultural and social continuity. They were also close to decision-makers because of their indigenous knowledge and skills, which gave them a significant influence in local governance. However, with colonization, their importance diminished significantly. Exploitation and ignorance reached new heights, and many communities lost interest in governance altogether. They were no longer seen as worthy or relevant in the political landscape and often became victims of state atrocities. As a result, they were largely excluded from political or cooperative movements. Moving into the post-independence period, these communities have been pushed even further out of the political picture. They are not considered important by politicians, and their communities are often neglected or marginalized. This shift highlights a stark change from their earlier significance and underscores ongoing challenges in political inclusion and recognition. Overall, these changes reflect a pattern of marginalization, moving from a position of influence to one of neglect, which has profound implications for their social and political development. Let's take a look at the economic changes over time. Before independence, livestock herds were quite large, often exceeding 100 cows and camels, which indicates a substantial reliance on livestock for livelihood. The livestock pattern was diverse, with species like cows, camels, goats, sheep, and buffalo all playing important roles. Grazing practices were guided by social norms, rules about when, where, and how grazing could happen, ensuring sustainable use of good and sufficient grazing lands. The Janata system was an important traditional method for managing grazing resources, and there was a focus on selecting breeds carefully and exchanging bulls to improve livestock quality. Now compare that to the post-independence period. Herd sizes drastically reduced to about 15 to 25 animals, reflecting a shift in economic strategies or resource availability. The species composition changed as well, with sheep becoming more prominent than goats, and buffalo surpassing cows and camels. Unfortunately, access to common grazing resources, or CPRs, has become limited, and control over these resources has diminished. This has led to degraded grazing lands and land grabbing through legal means, reducing the sustainability of livestock practices. Additionally, there's been a noticeable focus on crossbreeds, which has resulted in the loss of indigenous breeds, affecting genetic diversity and traditional resilience. Overall, these changes highlight a significant transformation in livestock management and economic strategies, shaping the livelihoods of local communities and influencing the sustainability of their practices. Let's take a closer look at the changes in the issues faced before and after independence. Starting with health, transfer of knowledge, and marketing, we see some significant shifts. In the pre-colonial period, cattle were generally healthy, although there were times when mass deaths occurred due to unknown illnesses. Despite these challenges, women and men possessed good indigenous knowledge and skills related to cattle rearing. Interestingly, milk and other produce were not sold regularly. Only the excess was sold, which suggests a more subsistence-oriented approach. Moving to the post-independence period, the health of cattle often declined due to a lack of water and fodder. This indicates growing environmental or resource challenges. Additionally, there was a noticeable loss in the transfer of indigenous knowledge, which could have long-term impacts on cattle management. On the positive side, the sale of raw milk increased, reflecting a shift towards commercialization and market-oriented production. Now, connecting these points to the broader theme of economic changes, we can see how these shifts in health, knowledge, and marketing practices played a role in shaping the evolving economy of the community or country. The transition from subsistence to more market-driven activities brought both opportunities and challenges that we will explore further. Now, let's delve into how colonial rule impacted pastoral life, specifically in the first part of this discussion. Colonial rulers believed it was essential to transform all grazing lands into cultivated farms. The main reason for this was to increase land revenue, which was a major goal of colonial administration. They saw cultivated land as a way to generate more income for the government. Additionally, expanding cultivated land was also driven by economic needs beyond the local context. The British needed large quantities of jute, cotton, and wheat, which were crucial for their industries in England. So, they encouraged more farming to meet these demands. This shift from pastoral to cultivated land had significant effects on local communities and the traditional pastoral way of life, tying into the broader theme of how colonial policies reshaped social and economic structures. Now, let's look at the waste land rules under colonial rule and how they impacted pastoral life. Essentially, these rules allowed the colonial administration to take over uncultivated lands and allocate them to select individuals. This means that lands which were previously unused or not cultivated were now being redistributed. As a result of this expansion of cultivated land, we saw a significant reduction in grazing grounds. This had a profound effect on pastoral communities, as their traditional grazing lands were being taken away or diminished. This process was part of a broader pattern during colonial rule, where land was restructured to serve colonial economic interests, often at the expense of indigenous ways of life. It highlights how policies like the waste land rules directly impacted pastoral life by reducing the available land for grazing, thereby disrupting traditional livelihoods. So, in the context of our overall theme, this shows how colonial land policies reshaped the landscape and affected both agricultural and pastoral communities, often leading to long-term social and economic changes. Today, I want to talk about the impact of the Forest Act during colonial rule and how it affected pastoral life. Under these acts, many forests were declared reserved, which meant that pastoralists were not allowed to enter these areas at all. This was a significant restriction because it limited their traditional grazing grounds. In addition to the reserved forests, there were other forests classified as protected. These forests had even more restrictions. People, including pastoralists, could not freely access many parts of these protected areas, and in some cases, entry was completely restricted. These policies were part of a broader effort by colonial authorities to control natural resources, but they also had serious implications for local communities who depended on these forests for their livelihood. It's important to see how these laws, while aimed at conservation, also disrupted traditional ways of life and access to land. This context helps us understand the broader theme of how colonial policies shaped not just the environment, but also the social and economic fabric of local communities. Now, let's look at the Criminal Tribes Act and its impact during colonial rule. The colonial authorities often viewed nomadic communities with suspicion, considering them potentially problematic. As a result, many groups involved in crafts, trading, and pastoral activities were classified as criminal tribes under this act. This classification wasn't just a label, it had serious implications. These communities were forced to live only in designated villages, known as notified villages, and their movements were heavily monitored by police officials. This approach reflected a broader pattern of control and suspicion that aimed to restrict their freedom and livelihood. Understanding this helps us see how colonial policies affected traditional ways of life and contributed to social marginalization. It's a clear example of how colonial rule often disrupted indigenous communities and their pastoral lifestyles, which ties into the larger theme of colonial impact on social structures. Now, let's talk about the grazing tax during colonial rule and its impact on pastoral life. The tax was calculated based on the number of cattle a person owned, so per head of cattle. As time went on, you'll notice that the tax rate increased quite rapidly. The colonial administration also made the tax collection system more efficient, aiming to maximize revenue. Between the 1850s and 1880s, they auctioned off the right to collect this tax to contractors. These contractors, of course, wanted to recover their investments and make a profit, so they often tried to collect as high a tax as possible. This increase in tax burden and the more aggressive collection methods had significant repercussions on pastoral communities, often disrupting traditional grazing practices and livelihoods. Overall, this system reflects how colonial policies prioritized revenue collection, often at the expense of local pastoral life and sustainability. Let's take a closer look at how the lives of pastoralists changed during this period. As the slide indicates, the availability of pasture land drastically decreased. This meant that there was less land available for grazing, and what remained was heavily used. As a result, pastoralists had no choice but to rely on continuous, intensive grazing of the remaining pasture. Unlike in the past, when seasonal movements allowed herders to move their animals to different grazing areas and give the land time to recover, this natural cycle was disrupted. Without these seasonal migrations, the vegetation couldn't regenerate, leading to a shortage of forage for the animals. This shortage had a direct impact on the health and productivity of the herds. The animal stock started to deteriorate because they simply couldn't find enough food. Tragically, many cattle died due to the lack of fodder. This overall change not only affected the pastoralists' livelihoods, but also marked a significant shift in their traditional ways of life, highlighting how environmental challenges can reshape social and economic structures. So, when faced with these significant changes, many pastoralists had to adapt in different ways. Some of them, for instance, reduced the size of their herds, cutting down on cattle to cope with limited resources. Others looked for new pastures, which was crucial for their survival. A good example of this is the ELCAAS, who, after the partition of 1947 and being unable to move into Sindh anymore, started migrating to Haryana to find fresh grazing lands. We also see that some wealthier pastoralists decided to settle down by buying land, giving up their traditional nomadic lifestyle. Some of these landowners became farmers, turning into peasants, while others shifted to more extensive trading activities to sustain themselves. On the other hand, poorer pastoralists faced even more hardships. Many of them had to borrow money from lenders just to survive. Unfortunately, this often led to them losing their cattle and sheep altogether, forcing them to take up work as laborers. They ended up working in fields or small towns, moving away from their traditional pastoral way of life. All of these responses highlight how resilient, yet vulnerable, pastoral communities are in the face of change, and they connect to the broader story of adaptation and survival in challenging times. Today, I want to highlight the significance of pastoralism in Africa. Over half of the world's pastoral population actually lives on this continent, making it a central part of the region's livelihood. You'll find diverse communities such as the Bedouins, Berbers, Maasai, Somali, Boran, and Turkana, each with their unique cultures and traditions. These communities primarily raise animals like cattle, camels, goats, sheep, and donkeys. But their economic activities go beyond just animal husbandry. They also sell products such as milk, meat, animal skins, and wool, which are vital sources of income. Some pastoralists engage in trade and transport, leveraging their mobility to connect markets. Others combine pastoralism with agriculture, making the most of available land and resources. And many, in fact, take on various odd jobs to supplement their earnings, showing their adaptability in diverse economic circumstances. This slide really underscores how integral pastoralism is to African livelihoods and how these communities adapt their practices to sustain themselves. It connects well to the broader theme of how different cultures utilize natural resources and adapt to their environments for survival and economic stability. Let's take a closer look at the Maasai, a fascinating tribal group from Eastern Africa. They are traditionally cattle herders, and what's really notable is that they have never engaged in the slave trade nor taken conquered tribes as slaves. Instead, they have historically displaced other tribes and taken their land, which has shaped their history and culture. The Maasai are well known for their skills as hunters, warriors, and herders. While they used to hunt more extensively in the past, most of the Maasai today no longer hunt in Africa. Their reputation for fearlessness remains strong, and they are also recognized for their kindness and helpfulness towards animals and all people. Currently, around 300,000 Maasai live in Kenya, and about 150,000 are in Tanzania. Their way of life and values offer important insights into the diversity and resilience of indigenous cultures across Africa. Let's take a closer look at Kilimanjaro and the Maasai land. Kilimanjaro, as many of you know, is Africa's highest peak and a symbol of natural beauty and challenge. It's not just a mountain, it's a cultural icon for the region. Surrounding Kilimanjaro is Maasai land, home to the Maasai people, who are renowned for their rich traditions, vibrant culture, and deep connection to the land. This area beautifully illustrates the intersection of nature and culture, showing how indigenous communities live in harmony with their environment. Recognizing this connection helps us appreciate the broader themes of conservation, cultural preservation, and sustainable tourism that are vital in this region. It's a perfect example of how natural landmarks and local communities intertwine to shape the identity of a place. Without access to sufficient grass, livestock often become malnourished. This highlights how crucial healthy pastures are for maintaining the health and productivity of animals. When the grazing resources are limited or of poor quality, animals can't get the nutrients they need, which affects their growth, reproduction, and overall well-being. This point ties back to the broader theme of sustainable land management and the importance of preserving natural resources. If we don't ensure healthy grazing lands, it not only impacts the livestock, but also the livelihoods of farmers and the ecosystems they depend on. So let's talk about what happened to the grazing lands of the Maasai. Before colonial rule, their territory was vast, stretching from northern Kenya all the way into the steppes of northern Tanzania. It was a large, open landscape that supported their nomadic lifestyle. But then, during the colonial period, European powers started dividing up Africa, and this had a profound impact on Maasailand. In 1885, the Maasailand was effectively split in half, cutting their land into separate territories. As a result, the Maasai lost more than 60% of their traditional pasture lands compared to the pre-colonial times. That's a huge reduction, and it meant they were pushed into much smaller, drier zones with poor quality pastures and unpredictable rainfall. At the same time, colonial authorities encouraged local peasant communities to expand cultivation, further reducing available grazing land. And in some cases, large areas of land that used to be for grazing were turned into game reserves, like the Masai Mara and Samburu National Park in Kenya, or Serengeti in Tanzania. All of this contributed to a significant decline in grazing lands, which directly affected the Maasai's ability to sustain their pastoral way of life. It's a clear example of how colonial land policies disrupted traditional livelihoods, fitting into our overall discussion about land use and its impact on indigenous communities. So, at this point in history, the borders of many regions were essentially closed. This meant that the movement of pastoralist communities was severely restricted. They needed to obtain special permits just to move from one place to another, and getting these permits was often quite difficult. If they were caught moving without permission, they faced harsh punishments. Europeans viewed these communities as savage and dangerous, which led to efforts to minimize any contact with them. This restriction wasn't just about control. It had a profound impact on their way of life. It highlights how colonial powers sought to regulate and limit the traditional lifestyles of these communities, which is a key part of understanding the broader context of colonial rule and its effects on indigenous peoples. When pastures dry, the Maasai traditionally relied on seasonal movement to cope with droughts. This strategy allowed them to move their herds to areas with better grazing and water. However, during colonial times, restrictions on movement were imposed, which made it much harder for them to adapt naturally. As a result, many cattle suffered from starvation and disease during severe drought years. For example, in 1930, the Maasai in Kenya had about 720,000 cattle, along with 820,000 sheep and 171,000 donkeys. But just 2 years later, during the droughts of 1933 and 1934, more than half of their cattle had died. This highlights how important mobility was to their survival and how colonial restrictions significantly impacted their ability to withstand environmental challenges. It also underscores a broader theme of how external policies can disrupt traditional ways of life and resilience. Let's take a closer look at how not all members of the Maasai community were affected equally during this period. During the pre-colonial times, the Maasai society was primarily divided into two main social groups, the elders and the warriors. The elders held the position of authority and were responsible for decision-making and leadership within the community. The warriors, on the other hand, were mainly younger men tasked with protecting the tribe and defending its interests. With the arrival of the British, things began to change significantly. The colonial administration introduced various measures to control and manage Maasai affairs. They imposed restrictions on traditional practices like raiding and warfare, which were vital aspects of Maasai culture. These restrictions gradually weakened the authority of both elders and warriors, disrupting the social balance that had existed for generations. At the same time, the colonial government appointed chiefs to oversee the community. Some of these chiefs, over time, accumulated considerable wealth. They could buy animals, goods, and land. This new leadership structure shifted power dynamics and made some chiefs more influential and wealthy than before. Meanwhile, not everyone within the Maasai community was able to adapt or cope with these changes. The poorer pastoralists, lacking sufficient resources, found it increasingly difficult to survive during tough times. Many of them had no choice but to migrate to towns in search of alternative livelihoods, which marked a significant shift from traditional pastoralism. This migration and economic shift led to the emergence of a new social divide, a clearer distinction between the wealthy and the poor within the Maasai community. So, as we see, these historical changes didn't affect everyone equally. Some groups gained power and wealth, while others struggled and moved away from traditional ways of life. This transformation played a crucial role in shaping the modern Maasai society we observe today.